I had never liked the Christmas parties at my parents' house. But this year, Grandpa called. "Come, Ethan." His voice crackled over the phone, thin but stubborn. "It might be my last one, with all of you together." That sentence hit me like a cold wind. My grandfather, Jordan Walker, wasn't one for drama or exaggeration. When he said something, he meant it. So I hung up, stared at my cramped studio apartment above Riley's bar, where the Friday night crowd was already getting loud downstairs, and made a decision I'd regret and cherish in equal measure. I ironed my only decent shirt, the blue one with the small stain near the collar that I always tried to hide with my jacket. I checked my wallet. $23 and some change. Enough for the bus across town, maybe a coffee if I skip breakfast tomorrow. The number 47 bus smelled like wet wool and regret. I sat in the back, watching the city transition from my neighborhood pawn shops, laundromats, taco trucks, to the West Hills, where the houses grew larger and the fences grew taller. My parents' house glowed like a Christmas catalog when I arrived. Twinkling lights wrapped around marble columns. A chandelier visible through the tall windows, dripping crystals over a 12-foot tree stacked with perfectly wrapped gifts. Guests moved across polished floors with champagne flutes and smiles that never quite reached their eyes. My mother, Helen Brooks, lived for this kind of performance. My father, Tyler Brooks, lived for the people who watched him perform. Me? I lived in a studio apartment above a noisy bar, working double shifts as a chef just to keep the lights on. I'm an only child. My parents had decided one heir was sufficient for their image, and even that one disappointed them. The valet looked at me like I'd arrived at the wrong address. I didn't blame him. My jacket was 3 years old. My shoes had a crack in the left sole, and I'd taken the bus while everyone else arrived in Mercedes and Teslas. "I'm family," I said simply. He nodded, though his expression suggested he didn't quite believe me. Inside, the warmth hit me first. Then the noise laughter that sounded rehearsed. Conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes in Aspen. I recognized some faces from previous years. Business partners, country club friends, people whose names I'd never bothered to learn because they'd never bothered to learn mine. My mother spotted me from across the room. Her smile flickered just for a second before she recovered and waved. She was mid-conversation with 3 women in designer dresses, but she broke away long enough to air-kiss both my cheeks. "Ethan, darling. You made it." Her eyes scanned my outfit. "That's the blue shirt." "Yes." "Well, you're here now. Your grandfather is on the back patio. Try to keep him comfortable." Translation: keep him out of sight. I nodded and moved through the crowd, declining champagne from a server who looked younger than the bottles she was carrying. The only person who ever made this place bearable was already waiting near the back patio doors, parked in his old wheelchair, a tartan blanket over his knees. Jordan Walker looked smaller every year, but his eyes were the same, calm, clear, a little amused, as if the rest of the world was constantly missing the punchline of some big cosmic joke. "You're late," he said when he saw me. "You scheduled me for a red carpet and gave me bus money." I shot back, leaning down to hug him. He smelled like peppermint and wood polish, the exact scent of his tiny old house where I'd spent half my childhood. While everyone else planned vacations to Paris, Grandpa taught me how to sand wood, cook soup from scraps, and fix broken chair legs. He never badmouthed my parents, but I learned more about peace from his tiny rented bungalow than from all the square footage in this mansion. His laugh was soft, wheezy. "Fair point. How's the restaurant?" "Exhausting. Chef Ramirez has me on lunch and dinner shifts 6 days a week." "That's good. Hard work builds character." "Hard work builds calluses and back pain," I corrected. But I was smiling. "Those too," he agreed. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the party unfold through the glass doors. My father held court near the fireplace, telling some story that had his audience laughing on cue. My mother floated between groups like a conductor managing an orchestra. "They're good at this," Grandpa observed quietly. "At what?" "Performing." I looked at him. His expression hadn't changed, but there was something in his tone, not bitterness. Just recognition. "Come on," he said. We positioned ourselves near the dining table, away from the main flow of traffic but close enough to the buffet that I could refill Grandpa's plate without drawing attention. The dining room was a masterpiece of holiday excess. The table stretched 12 feet, covered in cream linens with gold threading. Centerpieces of white roses and holly alternated with crystal candelabras. The buffet along the wall could have fed 50 people and probably cost more than my monthly rent. I filled Grandpa's plate carefully. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans that actually looked green instead of that grayish color from a can, and soup, tomato soup in delicate porcelain bowls with golden rims. "Fancy soup," I muttered. "It's just tomatoes and cream," Grandpa said. "Doesn't matter what bowl it's in." That was Grandpa. He'd taught me that lesson years ago, in his small kitchen with the linoleum floor and the stove that only had 3 working burners. We'd made soup from scratch, tomatoes from his neighbor's garden, herbs from the windowsill planter, day-old bread for dipping. Why do people spend so much money on things that don't matter? I'd asked him once, maybe when I was 10 or 11, after a particularly lavish birthday party at my parents' house where I'd gotten toys I never played with. He'd looked at me with those clear eyes and said, "Some people do, Ethan, but you don't have to. Someday, you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to be. The kind who impresses strangers, or the kind who helps friends." I didn't fully understand it then. I was beginning to understand it now. Grandpa ate slowly, his hands trembling slightly with each spoonful. The tremors had gotten worse over the past year. Some days, he could barely hold a fork. He never complained. But I saw the frustration in his eyes when his body wouldn't cooperate. Around us, the party continued its well-choreographed dance. A woman in a red dress laughed too loudly at something my father said. A man in a suit that probably cost more than my car if I'd had a car checked his phone repeatedly. Clearly bored but obligated to be here. 2 teenage kids, children of some business associate, looked as miserable as I felt at their age during these events. My mother approached the grand staircase, tapping her champagne glass with a silver knife. The crystal rang out like a bell, cutting through the conversation. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for just a moment." The room quieted obediently. She stood on the 3rd step, positioned perfectly so the chandelier light caught her diamond necklace. My father moved to stand at the base of the stairs, one hand on the banister, the picture of supportive husband. "I just want to thank you all for coming tonight," my mother began, her voice carrying that practiced warmth that wealthy people use when they're being gracious. "The holidays are about family, about gratitude, about recognizing how blessed we are." I felt Grandpa shift beside me. His spoon clinked against the bowl. "I'm so grateful for my husband, Tyler, for providing such a blessed life for our family, for his vision, his leadership, his dedication to building something meaningful." Applause rippled through the room. My father nodded humbly, as if he hadn't expected the praise he definitely expected. "And I'm grateful for this beautiful home, for the friendships we've built, for the opportunities we've been given to make a difference in our community." More applause. Someone said, "Here, here." I glanced at Grandpa. He was focused on his soup, trying to get the spoon to his mouth without spilling. His hand shook harder than usual. "So let's raise our glasses," my mother continued, lifting hers high. "To family, to success, to—" That's when it happened. Grandpa's hand trembled violently. The spoon slipped from his fingers, clattering against the side of the bowl. A streak of red soup splashed across the pristine white tablecloth and dripped onto the marble floor. It was nothing. A small accident. A frail old man with trembling hands doing his best in a body that no longer obeyed him. But in our house, a stain on the performance was a crime. The room fell silent. Not the polite, attentive silence from when my mother was speaking. This was different. Heavier. The kind of silence that forms when something socially unacceptable has happened and no one knows quite how to react. My mother's smile froze on her face. Her champagne glass hung suspended in midair. Every eye in the room shifted from her to the source of the disruption. To my grandfather, sitting in his wheelchair with soup on the tablecloth and shame coloring his weathered face. My mother's smile didn't just fade. It sharpened, like a blade being drawn. "For God's sake, Dad," she hissed, loud enough for everyone in our immediate circle to hear clearly. "Can't you control yourself for one evening? You're making a mess like always." The words cut deeper than any look could. Grandpa's knuckles went white on the armrest of his wheelchair. His lower lip trembled, not from fear, but from humiliation. In that moment, he looked every one of his 80 years, and then some. My mother descended the stairs, her heels clicking sharply against marble. She moved toward us with the purposeful stride of someone addressing a problem. "Helen, it's fine," my father said from his position near the fireplace. But his tone suggested it very much was not fine. "We'll clean it." She ignored him. She reached our table and snatched the bowl out of Grandpa's hands so violently that more soup splashed over his lap, staining his slacks. He flinched, and I felt something hot and sharp twist in my chest. "You knew this would happen," she continued, her voice rising. "Dragging him here, Tyler, he ruins everything. Every time. Look at this scene." People were staring now. Not just glancing. Full-on staring. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked uncomfortable. A few looked disgusted, though, whether at Grandpa or at my mother, I couldn't tell. My father approached, his jaw tight. "Enough, Helen. We'll handle this quietly." Quietly? She grabbed a napkin and began dabbing at the tablecloth, like it had personally offended her. "This is a disaster. The smell, the wheelchair tracks on the floor, the medications, the constant accommodation." "Mom." The word came out of my mouth low and sharp, like a knife sliding across glass. She froze, turned. Her eyes narrowed as they landed on me. The disappointing son. The one who chose to cook in a kitchen instead of manage portfolios in an office. "What did you say?" I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound loud in the awful silence. "Apologize to him," I said clearly. "Right now." The air thickened. It felt like the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. My father's expression darkened. "Ethan." It was a warning. The same warning I'd heard my whole life. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass us. Don't challenge the order of things. I ignored it. "You're humiliating him in front of everyone." I continued, my voice shaking but steady. "For spilling soup. He's 80 years old. His hands shake. That's not a crime." My mother's face flushed red. "He's embarrassing us." "He's embarrassing you?" I stepped between her and Grandpa, physically blocking her from him. "He's your father. He raised you. He took care of you. And you're treating him like trash because he spilled soup at your perfect party?" A few guests had started backing away, sensing the confrontation escalating. Others leaned in, unable to look away. "He's been embarrassing us for years," my mother hissed, her voice dropping to something venomous. "Living off us, clinging to this family like some kind of burden we can't shake." I felt something inside me snap. "He raised you," I said quietly, but every word carried across the room. "He raised both of you. He watched your kids when you were too busy showing off in hotel lobbies. He taught me more about decency in his tiny rented house than I've learned from either of you in 32 years. A woman near the fireplace gasped softly. A man coughed into his fist. My mother's face went from red to white. My father moved closer, and I could smell his cologne mixed with wine. It was overwhelming, almost nauseating. "Don't talk to your mother that way," he said, his voice low and dangerous. My heart pounded against my ribs. "Then don't let her talk to him that way." For a second, everything froze. The tree lights, the music from the speakers, the clink of glasses. It was like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then my father's hand moved. The slap cracked across my face so loud the music actually stopped. My cheek burned. My ears rang. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched whine and the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my skull. No one moved. 50 people stood frozen in a tableau of shock and second-hand embarrassment. A woman near the tree had her hand over her mouth. A man by the bar had stopped mid-pour, the bottle of wine tilted at a dangerous angle. Grandpa whispered my name, his voice breaking. Ethan. My father straightened his suit jacket, smoothing it down as if he'd simply adjusted his tie rather than struck his own son across the face in front of a room full of witnesses. If you defend that old man over your own parents, he said coldly, then you can leave with him. Tonight. I stared at him, my vision swimming slightly. My face throbbed where his hand had connected. I could feel the heat of it, the sharp sting that would probably bruise by morning. You're throwing your own father out of your house, I said slowly, making sure I understood correctly. On Christmas. Because he spilled soup? I'm throwing out a source of constant drama, my father corrected, his voice steady and cold as ice. And anyone who wants to join him. The room remained silent. No one defended me. No one defended Grandpa. They just stood there, holding their champagne and their judgment, waiting to see how this played out. My mother folded her arms across her chest, her expression hard. Go, she said. You never fit here anyway. That hurt worse than the slap. Because it was true, and we both knew it. I'd never fit in this world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers and conversations about quarterly earnings. I'd tried. For years, I'd tried. But I was always the wrong size, the wrong shape, speaking the wrong language in the wrong accent. I looked down at Grandpa. His eyes were wet, but there was something else there too. A quiet, piercing sadness, not for himself, but for me. He'd seen this coming. Maybe he'd always known it would come to this. I could apologize. I could laugh it off. Say I'd overreacted, that I was stressed from work. I could swallow my pride and stay. Make peace, preserve whatever broken thing passed for family in this house. But then I remembered something Grandpa had told me years ago. I'd been 16, crying at his small kitchen table because my parents had missed another school event, another award ceremony, where I'd gotten recognition for something they didn't value. They'd been at a hotel opening in Seattle. Important business. Couldn't be rescheduled. Grandpa had made me tomato soup from scratch, just like tonight, and he'd sat across from me in that cramped kitchen and said, "Money can buy comfort, Ethan, but it can't buy peace. Don't ever trade your peace for anyone's approval, not even mine." I'd asked him what he meant. He'd smiled sadly and said, "Someday, you'll understand. And when that day comes, you'll have to choose who you are. Choose carefully." I understood now. I took a breath. "Fine," I said. "I'll go with him." I moved behind Grandpa's wheelchair, my hands gripping the handles. They were cold beneath my palms, or maybe my hands were just shaking. "Ethan, you don't have to." Grandpa started. "Yes, I do," I said quietly. I wheeled him toward the front door. The crowd parted like water, everyone stepping back to give us a wide berth. No one tried to stop us. No one said a word. As we passed the Christmas tree, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the darkened window. An old man in a wheelchair. A young man in a cheap blue shirt with a red handprint blooming on his face. We looked like exactly what we were. The unwanted, being shown the door. My father turned his back on us, already moving toward a group of guests who were trying very hard to pretend nothing had happened. My mother climbed back up the stairs to retrieve her champagne glass, her posture perfect, her expression composed. The party would go on. The stain would be cleaned. The story would be revised into something more palatable by morning. But Grandpa and I would still be gone. A young server, the same one who'd offered me champagne earlier, held the door open for us. Her eyes were sympathetic, maybe even a little teary. "I'm sorry," she whispered as we passed. "Don't be," I said. Outside, the cold hit like a physical blow. The temperature had dropped since I'd arrived, and snow was starting to fall. Small flakes swirled in the glow of the Christmas lights, catching the reds and greens and golds, turning the front yard into something almost magical. Almost. Grandpa used the city's disability transport service for his medical appointments, but tonight we needed something faster. I pulled out my phone to call a rideshare, but before I could, an older man in a simple jacket approached from the street. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I'm Carl, from Access Ride. Your regular driver. I was waiting nearby in case you needed an early pickup. I looked at Grandpa, surprised. He'd planned for this possibility. Thank you, Carl, Grandpa said quietly. Carl helped us into his accessible van, his movements practiced and professional. He folded the wheelchair efficiently, loading it without a word. If he had questions about why we were leaving early, why my face was red, why Grandpa had soup stains on his slacks, he didn't ask them. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the house one last time. Through the tall windows, I could see people returning to their conversations, their champagne, their carefully constructed Christmas cheer. The music had started again. The party was recovering. They were already forgetting we'd been there. I'm sorry, I whispered to Grandpa. He reached up and squeezed my hand where it rested on his shoulder. His grip was weak, trembling, but the intention was clear. Don't be, he murmured. Tonight, you finally chose who you are. The van moved through the snowy streets, leaving behind the glittering mansion and the family I'd been born into. I'd left behind the warmth, the wealth, the approval I'd never quite earned. And I had no idea that I'd just made the most important decision of my life. The next months were the hardest of my life. Grandpa couldn't live alone anymore. His rented bungalow had stairs he couldn't climb, a bathroom too small for a wheelchair, a kitchen he couldn't navigate safely. So he moved into my studio apartment, which was barely big enough for one person, let alone two. We sold his old car, first the sedan that Carl from Access Ride had occasionally driven for longer trips. It went for $3,200, which felt like a fortune until I divided it by how many months it would need to last. Then we sold my gaming console, the flat-screen TV I'd saved up for, my bicycle, anything that wasn't essential. My apartment became a careful balance of necessity and space management. Grandpa's wheelchair took up most of the floor space. His medications lined the windowsill. The small table I used to eat at became his workstation during the day. I took every shift the restaurant would give me. Lunch prep starting at 9, service until 3, then back at 5 for dinner prep and service until midnight. I slept from 1 to 6, got up, helped Grandpa with his morning routine, and did it all over again. I learned things I'd never expected to learn. How to change bedpans without gagging. How to massage stiff legs to prevent bed sores. How to coax someone to eat when their hands shook too badly to hold a fork, and their pride made them want to refuse help. How to give someone a shower when they couldn't stand without support. How to make dignity possible in situations that stripped it away. Some days were harder than others. There were days when Grandpa's hands shook so violently he couldn't feed himself at all, and I had to spoon soup into his mouth between my shifts like he was a child. Days when he'd have accidents because he couldn't get to the bathroom fast enough, and I wasn't home to help. Days when the frustration and humiliation made him cry silently in his chair, while I pretended not to notice so he could keep his pride. My friends stopped calling after the first month. I'd canceled too many plans, declined too many invitations. They were young and single and child-free, and they couldn't understand why I'd chosen this. Eventually, they stopped trying to understand. My savings account drained like water through a sieve. Grandpa's medications alone cost $400 a month. Rent was $950. Utilities, food, supplies, co-pays for doctor visits, it all added up faster than I could earn it. I lived on leftovers from the restaurant kitchen and cheap instant noodles. Chef Ramirez pretended not to notice when I packed up extra food at the end of shifts. He probably thought I was just hungry. He didn't know I was feeding 2 people on 1 income. My parents never called. Not once. Not to check on me. Not to check on Grandpa. Not even to send a perfunctory text message on my birthday. I later learned they'd told their social circle that Grandpa had moved to a care facility upstate and that I'd taken a job overseas. They'd erased us from their narrative entirely, rewritten the story to avoid the stain of that Christmas night. But at night, when the shifts were done and the city was quiet, we'd sit by the window with steaming mugs of peppermint tea. And in those moments, I felt something I'd never felt in my parents' mansion: peace. Grandpa told me stories. Not about money or business or success. About building things with his hands. about staying married to Grandma Avery through years when they had nothing but each other, about mistakes he'd made and the people who'd forgiven him anyway, about what mattered when everything else was stripped away. You could call them, he said one night, about 4 months after Christmas, your parents. Make peace. I sipped my tea, watching snow fall outside the window. And say what? Sorry for defending you? You could have your life back. This is my life now. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, you shouldn't have to sacrifice everything for an old man who spilled soup. I looked at him then, really looked at him. His face was thinner than it had been at Christmas. His eyes were tired. But there was something else there too. Something I couldn't quite name. Sometimes I wondered why Grandpa never seemed worried about money. While I panicked about rent and bills, he remained strangely calm, almost peaceful. I chalked it up to old age, to having lived through harder times, to the resignation that comes with having nothing left to lose. I had no idea how wrong I was. You taught me that integrity costs something, I said. If it didn't cost anything, everyone would have it. He smiled, and for just a second, I saw something flicker in his expression. Pride, maybe, or relief. Your grandmother would have liked you, he said softly. I wish I'd known her. She knew you. I talked about you all the time before she passed. About how you chose cooking instead of business school. About how you cared more about making something good than making something profitable. She said you'd be tested someday. That life tests everyone eventually. I think I'm failing the test, I admitted. I'm exhausted all the time. I can barely pay rent. My manager threatened to fire me last week because I've been late too many times. You're not failing, Grandpa said firmly. You're passing. You just don't see the grade yet. You're said. You're said. You're said. You're said. You're passing, you just don't see the grade yet. I didn't understand what he meant. But I would. Soon. 6 months after Christmas, nothing had changed. And everything had changed. Work was getting harder. Chef Ramirez pulled me aside one rainy Tuesday afternoon after lunch service. Ethan, we need to talk. I knew that tone. That was the, I'm letting you go tone. I'd heard it before, seen other cooks receive it, and now it was my turn. I know I've been late, I started. You've been late 11 times in the past 2 months. You fell asleep at the prep station last week. Yesterday, you burnt an entire batch of hollandaise because you weren't paying attention. I'm sorry. I'll do better. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I like you, Ethan. You're a good cook when you're focused. But I can't run a kitchen with someone who's only half present. If you miss one more shift or show up late again, I'll have to replace you. I nodded, swallowing the panic. Understood. Is everything okay? At home? Yeah. Everything's fine. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push. I left the restaurant feeling like I was drowning. If I lost this job, we'd lose the apartment. If we lost the apartment, I had no idea what we'd do. Shelters wouldn't take both of us. I couldn't afford a nursing home. We'd end up on the street, and Grandpa wouldn't survive that. When I got home, Grandpa was in his wheelchair by the window, looking out at the rain. He turned when he heard me come in. How was work? Fine, I lied. He studied me for a long moment. I'm making this too hard for you. You're not making anything hard. Life is just complicated right now. I have some money saved. Not much. But we're not using your money, Grandpa. We've been over this. Ethan, I'm handling it. We're fine. But we weren't fine, and we both knew it. That's when he asked me to do something strange. One rainy afternoon, a few days after my conversation with Chef Ramirez, Grandpa looked at me over the rim of his peppermint tea and said, I need you to take a day off. I can't, I said automatically. If I miss another shift, they'll replace me. I'm asking you to trust me, he said softly. Just this once, dress nicely. We're going for a drive. A drive? Where? And how? We sold your car. It's a surprise. But I need you to trust me, Ethan. Please. There was something in his voice. Something urgent and sad and hopeful all at once. something that made me realize this was important to him in a way I didn't understand. "Okay," I said finally. "Okay, I'll call in tomorrow." He smiled, and for the first time in months, he looked lighter. "Thank you." The next morning, I called Chef Ramirez and told him I had a family emergency. He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "This is your last chance, Ethan. I mean it. I understand. Thank you." I hung up and looked at Grandpa, who was already dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt I didn't recognize. Where had he gotten those? At exactly 10 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find a man in a dark suit standing in the hallway. He was middle-aged, professional, with the kind of posture that suggested military or security training. "Good morning," he said politely. "I'm Liam. I'm here for Mr. Walker." "Who are you?" I asked, confused. "Mr. Walker's driver." I blinked. "His driver?" "Behind me," Grandpa chuckled softly. "Let him in, Ethan. We need to go." I stepped aside, my mind racing. "Driver? What driver?" Grandpa took the city's disability transport service for his appointments. He'd never mentioned having a private driver. Liam moved into the apartment with practiced efficiency, helping Grandpa into a sleek black car parked on the street. Not the accessible van from Access Ride. This was a luxury vehicle, all dark windows and leather seats and that new car smell. I slid into the back seat next to Grandpa, my confusion growing. "Grandpa, what's going on? Who is this guy?" "You'll see," he said simply. "Just enjoy the ride." We drove through the city, heading west toward the hills. I watched familiar neighborhoods slide past, then unfamiliar ones. Then no neighborhoods at all, just winding roads and tall trees and houses that got bigger the farther we went. "Grandpa, almost there," he said. Liam drove with the familiarity of someone who'd made this journey many times. He knew exactly where he was going, and then we turned through a set of iron gates that opened automatically as we approached. My heart started pounding. "Grandpa, where are we?" He didn't answer, just smiled that small, knowing smile I'd seen so many times before. The driveway seemed endless. We drove past manicured gardens, past fountains and sculptures, past trees that had been carefully shaped and positioned for maximum aesthetic impact. The car moved smoothly, silently, like we were gliding rather than driving, and at the end of that long driveway stood a mansion that made my parents' villa look like a starter home. Stone walls, tall windows that caught the morning light, a glimmering glass entrance with double doors that probably cost more than a year of my rent, gardens that stretched in every direction, maintained with the kind of precision that required a full-time staff. My heart started racing. "Grandpa, where are we?" He didn't answer, just smiled. The car stopped in front of the entrance. Two security guards in professional suits straightened when they saw us, then moved to open the car doors. "Welcome back, sir," one of them said to Grandpa. "Not Mr. Walker, sir." Liam helped Grandpa into his wheelchair with a familiarity that suggested he'd done this many times before. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what was happening. "Grandpa, what is this place?" He looked up at me, and his eyes, those calm, clear eyes, held something I'd never seen before. Not amusement, not sadness, something else. Something like relief. "Our home," he said quietly. "Let's go home, Ethan." The doors opened before we reached them, pulled by staff members in dark uniforms who bowed their heads slightly as we entered. The foyer was marble, the chandelier was crystal, and it was bigger, much bigger, than my entire apartment. Uniformed staff lined the sides of the entrance hall, their heads bowed, murmuring greetings. "Welcome home, sir." "Good morning, Mr. Walker. It's good to have you back." The staff had maintained the estate for months during Grandpa's absence, waiting patiently for his return. He'd stayed away deliberately, living the test fully, seeing if I would choose him when he appeared to have nothing. I felt like I'd entered an alternate reality. Or maybe I'd fallen asleep on the bus, and this was all some exhaustion-fueled dream. A woman in a dark suit stepped forward. She was professional, composed, maybe 50 years old. "Good afternoon, Mr. Jordan," she said. "Everything is prepared in your office." Mr. Jordan, not Mr. Walker, Jordan. I looked at Grandpa, my throat tight. "What's going on?" He reached up and patted my hand. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago," he said. "But I had to be sure." "Sure of what?" My voice came out strangled. "Of you," he said simply. "Of who you are when everything is taken away." He wheeled himself down a hallway lined with artwork and photographs. I followed, my legs moving automatically while my brain tried to catch up. He stopped in front of a pair of heavy oak doors. They swung open onto an office, bigger than my apartment. Bigger than the entire floor of my apartment building, maybe. Shelves lined with model chairs and tables. Sketches pinned to corkboards. Designs spread across a massive desk. The smell of wood polish and leather, and on the wall behind the desk, framed in elegant wood, hung a newspaper article. The headline read, "The King of Northwest Furniture, Jordan Walker builds an empire from wood and willpower." The photo showed a younger man standing in a warehouse full of handcrafted tables. He was smiling, confident. His arms crossed over his chest. He had Grandpa's eyes. My knees went weak. You're. He nodded slowly. "I was," he said, "before your father betrayed me." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room seemed to tilt around me. "Grandpa, no. Jordan Walker, furniture empire builder." The man in the newspaper gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Ethan. This is going to take a while." I sat. Or maybe I collapsed. I'm not sure. There was a difference at that moment. He wheeled himself behind the massive desk, his movements slow but deliberate. For the first time in months, maybe years, he didn't look frail. He looked like a man stepping back into his skin, a man returning to a place he'd always belonged. "I'm going to tell you a story," he said, "and I need you to listen. Really listen. Can you do that?" I nodded, incapable of speech. "I started with nothing," he began. 19 years old, fresh out of high school, no college education, no prospects. But I had hands that could work, and a mind that understood how things fit together. He pointed to a small photograph on his desk. A tiny workshop, barely bigger than a shed. That was my first shop. Rented space in the back of a furniture store. I built tables at night and sold them on weekends. 1 table became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became a full production line. His eyes grew distant, remembering. By the time I was 40, I owned the largest furniture manufacturing company in the Northwest. We employed over 2,000 people. Our designs were in homes across the country. I'd built something from nothing but wood and willpower. "And Dad?" I asked, my voice hoarse. His expression darkened. "Your father." "Yes. Tyler worked for me from the time he was 18. I taught him everything. The business side, the production side, the relationships with suppliers and distributors. When he turned 35, I made him CFO. I trusted him completely." He paused, his jaw tightening. "That was my mistake." "What happened?" 22 years ago, the company started having problems. Nothing major at first. Small discrepancies in the books. Orders going missing. Designs showing up at competitor companies. I thought it was bad luck. Bad timing. The market shifting. He rolled to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. Old documents, yellowed with age. It wasn't bad luck, it was betrayal. He spread the documents across the desk. I leaned forward, trying to make sense of the numbers and legal language. "Your father was selling trade secrets to competitors. He was shifting assets into shell companies he controlled. He was systematically dismantling my company from the inside while I trusted him to run it." My stomach turned. Why? Money, power, ambition. Grandpa's voice was flat. He wanted his own empire. And he didn't want to wait for me to die to inherit it. So he took it. "With your mother's help." "Mom knew?" "She encouraged it. She was the one who pushed me to modernize. To sign papers without reading them carefully. to trust Tyler to handle the details. His hands clenched on the armrests. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. The company collapsed. The stress triggered a stroke. And 3 months later, I had the car accident that put me in this chair. I felt sick. How do you think Dad built his hotel chain? Exactly. How do you think a CFO from a furniture company suddenly had the capital to start a luxury hotel business? Grandpa leaned forward. He built it on my foundation, on my money, on my reputation, and when I confronted him, when I threatened to go public, he had me declared mentally unfit due to the stroke. That's fraud. It's worse than fraud. It's patricide by another name. His eyes met mine. I lost my company, my reputation, my body, everything I'd built over 40 years, gone in less than 2. Why didn't you fight back? He smiled sadly. I was going to. I had lawyers, evidence, witnesses. But then, he trailed off, looking out the window. Your mother threatened to take you away. You were 12. She said if I pursued legal action, I'd never see you again, that I'd die alone in some nursing facility without ever knowing my grandson. My throat tightened. That was 20 years ago, 2 years after the betrayal began. So I stopped fighting. I sold what was left, took what little they couldn't touch, and disappeared. Moved into that rented bungalow. Became the broken old man everyone expected me to be. He looked at me. But I kept watching you, Ethan. Every Christmas. Every birthday they bothered to invite me to. I watched you grow up. And I watched to see if there was any remorse from them. There wasn't, I said quietly. No, there wasn't. He opened another drawer, pulled out more documents. So, I did something they never expected. What? His smile grew. I started over. Grandpa wheeled over to the window, looking out at the estate grounds. I lost my company, my reputation, my body, he said. But I didn't lose my mind. And I didn't lose my hands. Not completely. He turned back to me. While everyone believed I was broken and broke, I quietly started again, from a freezing garage behind that rented house. You? What? I used old contacts. Small contracts at first. Private clients who remembered my work. I couldn't build furniture myself anymore. My hands don't work well enough. But I could design. I could supervise. I could teach. He gestured around the office. My mind worked fine. My eyes could still see flaws in a joint, gaps in a design. I hired hands to do what mine couldn't anymore. Loyal craftsmen your father had discarded when he destroyed the original company. I became the brain. They became the body. 1 table became 5. 5 became 50. I stared at the newspaper article on the wall, then at the designs on the desk, then at Grandpa. This is all yours? Rebuilt over 20 years. Carefully, quietly, using a different company name, different distribution channels. He pointed around the office, at the plans, the designs. I used offshore holding companies, trusts, and legal structures that separated my name from the business. To anyone searching, including your father, Jordan Walker, was exactly what he appeared, a disabled pensioner living on Social Security. The empire was hidden behind layers of corporate privacy. He leaned forward. Walker Furniture doesn't exist anymore. But Jordan Designs employs 800 people and generates $1.1 billion in annual revenue. The number hit me like a physical blow. $1.1 billion. I stayed away from your parents on purpose, he continued. I wanted to see if there was any remorse, any guilt, any recognition that what they'd done was wrong. And, every time your father looked at me, all I saw was annoyance that I was still alive. Every time your mother spoke to me, it was to complain about the burden of taking care of her poor, disabled father. His voice hardened. They thought I was pathetic, dependent, harmless. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. All those years, why didn't you say something? He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were wet. Because I needed to know if you loved me when you thought I had nothing, he said softly. I needed to know if you were like them, or if you were different. You were testing me? I was protecting you. If I'd told you the truth, you'd have been torn between us. You'd have faced an impossible choice, and I couldn't do that to a child. So I waited. For what? For you to show me who you were. Without influence. Without bribery. Without any reason to choose me, except that it was the right thing to do. I thought about Christmas night, about standing up for him, about leaving with him despite losing everything. And Christmas gave you your answer, I whispered. He nodded. You chose me when you thought I was worth nothing, when defending me cost you everything. He wheeled closer, taking my hand. That's when I knew. That's when I was sure. Tears were running down my face now. Sure of what? That you're nothing like them. That you're the man I hoped you'd become. That you're worthy of what comes next. He opened a drawer in the desk, pulled out 2 folders, one thick, one thin. My heart started pounding again. What are those? He placed them on the desk in front of me. Choices, he said. The most important choices you'll ever make. I stared at the folders like they might explode. Grandpa tapped the thin one first. In this one is my updated will. Every share of Jordan Designs. Every account. Every property. This estate. The company. The investments. Every piece of this $1.1 billion empire goes to you. My vision blurred. I couldn't have heard that right. $1.1 billion. To me? Grandpa? I can't. Let me finish. He tapped the thick folder. In this one is 20 years of evidence. Every illegal transfer your father made, every shell company he created, every stolen design, every witness statement I've collected. Every financial record that proves what he did. He opened it, showing me page after page of documents. Bank statements, testimony transcripts, corporate filings, emails. The evidence was overwhelming, meticulous, damning. This is enough to not only destroy your parents' empire, he said quietly, but to send them to prison. Your father would be looking at 15 to 20 years for fraud, embezzlement, and theft of intellectual property. Your mother would face charges as an accomplice. I couldn't breathe. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm not asking you to hate them, he said. I'm asking you to decide what kind of man you want to be. He leaned back in his wheelchair, his expression unreadable. You can take the inheritance and hide the evidence. Live in luxury. Forgive them. Or at least forget them. Move on with your life as a billionaire. He paused. Or you can do what's right, regardless of the cost. You can pursue justice, even though it means destroying your own parents. Even though it means everyone will know your family's shame. My hands shook as I reached toward the folders. I don't want revenge, Grandpa said. I've lived 20 years with this anger, and it's exhausted me. But I won't die knowing they got away with it. That other people might suffer because I was too weak or too forgiving to stop them. You're not weak, I said hoarsely. Then neither are you. He met my eyes. So choose, Ethan. The money and the silence, or the truth and the consequences. But choose as yourself, not as my grandson, not as their son. As Ethan Brooks, the man who stood up for an old man at a Christmas party. I looked at the folders. The thin one promising comfort, security, escape. The thick one promising justice, consequences, pain. Why me? I whispered. Why give all this to me? His eyes glittered with tears. Because on the night they chose their image, he said softly, you chose me. Because you gave up everything when you thought I was worth nothing. Because you spent 6 months exhausting yourself to take care of an old man who you believed couldn't give you anything in return. He reached across the desk and gripped my hand. You already passed the test, Ethan. The inheritance is yours regardless of what you choose right now. But this. He touched the thick folder. This decision will define who you become. Not who you are, I already know that. But who you become. I stared at the folders for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I could take the money and run. Or I could do what Grandpa had taught me to do my whole life. Stand up. Even when it cost everything. I picked up both folders. "I'll think about the money," I said, my voice hoarse. "But the evidence." "That goes to the prosecutor." For the first time since Christmas, I saw Grandpa's shoulders drop in relief. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he looked like he might cry, or laugh, or both. "That," he said softly, "is exactly what I hoped you'd say." "You knew," I said. "You knew what I'd choose." "I hoped." "There's a difference." He opened his eyes, and they were bright. "If you'd chosen to hide the evidence, the inheritance would have gone to charity. My lawyers would have presented you with both folders after my death. Depending on your choice, the will would be executed accordingly. I left detailed instructions with them." He paused. "I'd have left you enough to live comfortably, but not this. Never this. You were testing me again. I was giving you a choice. The test was Christmas. This was the consequence of passing it." I looked down at the thick folder in my hands. 20 years of evidence. My parents' entire lives, distilled into documentation of their crimes. "They'll hate me," I said. "They already do, but that's their failing, not yours. Everyone will know. The trial will be public. Justice usually is. People will talk. They'll say I did it for the money, that I turned on my family to get rich." Grandpa wheeled closer. "Let them talk. You and I will know the truth. That's all that matters." I nodded, though my hands were shaking. "What happens now?" "Now we call my lawyers. They've been ready for this conversation for 20 years. He smiled. "We have an appointment with the district attorney's office next week. They'll review the evidence, start an investigation. It'll take months, maybe years. But it'll be thorough. And Dad and Mom, they'll get exactly what they deserve. No more, no less." I set the folders on the desk and sank into the chair. My entire body felt heavy, exhausted, wrung out. "I don't feel victorious," I admitted. "Good. Victory would be the wrong emotion." Grandpa's voice was gentle. "This isn't about winning. It's about accountability, about making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else because I was too cowardly to speak up." "You're not a coward." I was. For 20 years, I was silent. I told myself it was to protect you, but it was also to protect myself. To avoid the pain of facing what my own son had done. He looked at me. "But you're not silent. And that's why this empire is yours now. I don't know how to run a billion-dollar company. Neither did I when I started. You'll learn, and you'll have help." He gestured toward the door. "I've built a good team. Loyal people. They'll support you. What about you?" His smile was sad. "I'm tired, Ethan. I've been tired for a long time. Knowing you'll do the right thing, it lets me rest." Something in his tone made my chest tighten. "Grandpa, I'm not going anywhere yet," he said quickly. "But when I do, I want to go, knowing I left the world a little more just than I found it. You're going to help me do that." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He reached into another drawer and pulled out a phone. "Let me call the lawyers. We have work to do." As he dialed, I looked around the office. At the designs on the walls. At the models on the shelves. At the empire built quietly, carefully. My empire now. And I was going to use it to make sure my parents faced consequences for what they'd done. Not for revenge, for justice. 10 months later, I stood outside the federal courthouse in downtown Portland, watching media vans set up their cameras. The headline on the morning paper read, "Portland Hotel King, accused of defrauding own father." My father's face stared out from every screen, every newspaper, every phone in the city. Tyler Brooks, philanthropist, businessman, community leader, accused of fraud, embezzlement, and theft of intellectual property. The legal process had taken longer than expected. 2 months of investigation by the district attorney's office, 3 months assembling the case. Another 5 months of pretrial motions, discovery, and legal maneuvering. The trial had become a media sensation. A wealthy father, betrayed by his own son. A hidden empire. A Christmas party confrontation that exposed years of secrets. It had everything people loved: wealth, betrayal, family drama. I hated every second of it. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Reporters filled the gallery. Sketch artists positioned themselves for the best angles. My father sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his expression carefully neutral. My mother sat beside him, her perfect hair and designer clothes unable to hide the cracks in her composure. They didn't look at me. Over the next 12 weeks, 32 witnesses testified. Old employees who remembered the night shift changes in production schedules, when designs started going missing. Accountants who'd been fired for questioning irregular transfers. Lawyers who'd been pushed out when they raised concerns about shell companies. One by one, they told their stories. "Mr. Brooks ordered us to destroy the original design files," said Michael Chen, a former production manager. "He said we were streamlining. But I kept copies. Something felt wrong. I noticed $2.3 million moving through accounts that shouldn't have existed," testified Jennifer Rodriguez, a forensic accountant. "When I brought it to Mr. Brooks's attention, I was terminated within a week. He told me his father was mentally incompetent," said Raymond Price, a former corporate attorney. "That Jordan Walker's stroke had left him unable to manage his own affairs. He asked me to file paperwork to take control of all assets. When I requested a medical evaluation first, I was fired. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing asset transfers. Emails discussing acquisitions of Walker Furniture Designs. Shell company registrations traced back to my father's signature. Grandpa's stolen designs displayed side by side with my father's original hotel furniture, identical in every detail except the signature. My father's lawyers argued statute of limitations. They claimed Grandpa had waited too long. That the fraud, if it occurred, was too old to prosecute. But the prosecution countered with evidence that made their defense crumble. The fraud was ongoing. The prosecution presented evidence that Tyler Brooks had continued incorporating stolen designs into new hotel properties as recently as 6 months ago, the lead prosecutor argued. Each use of stolen intellectual property reset the statute of limitations clock. The fraud wasn't historical, it was active and continuing. They showed hotel furniture catalogs from the past 5 years, each piece traceable to Jordan Walker's original designs from decades ago. "This isn't a crime from 22 years ago," the prosecutor continued. "This is a crime that continued until the day Mr. Jordan Walker came forward. Every piece of furniture sold, every hotel opened, every profit earned, all built on theft that never stopped. On week 9, I was called to testify. I walked to the stand feeling like I might vomit. Every eye in the courtroom watched me. The judge, the jury, the media, my parents." The prosecutor stood. "Mr. Brooks, can you describe Christmas night 2 years ago?" I did, every detail. The party, the soup spill, my mother's cruelty, my father's slap, the exile. "And why did you choose to leave with your grandfather?" "Because it was the right thing to do, even though it cost you everything, especially because it cost everything. That's how you know it means something." The defense attorney cross-examined me, trying to paint me as vengeful, as motivated by money, as someone who turned on his family for an inheritance. "Isn't it true, Mr. Brooks, that you stand to inherit $1.1 billion from Jordan Walker?" "Yes. And isn't it true that you wouldn't receive that inheritance if you maintained a relationship with your parents?" "No, that's not true." "Explain." "I'd receive the inheritance regardless." Grandpa made that clear. "This case has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with justice." "Justice? Or revenge?" I looked at my father then, really looked at him. He sat perfectly still, his expression blank, giving nothing away. "If I wanted revenge," I said quietly, "I'd have done this years ago. but I didn't know what he'd done until recently. This isn't about hurting him. It's about accountability. About making sure what happened to my grandfather doesn't happen to someone else. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, the four women stood. On the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, guilty. On the charge of theft of intellectual property, guilty. 12 charges, guilty on every one. My father's face remained blank. My mother gasped, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The courtroom was silent as the judge reviewed the documents before her. "Mr. Brooks," she said, looking at my father over her reading glasses. "I've presided over many cases in my career, but few have disturbed me as much as this one." My father stood, his lawyer beside him. "You betrayed your own father, a man who built something from nothing and trusted you to help him maintain it. Instead, you systematically destroyed what he'd built, stole his life's work, and left him broken and impoverished." She paused. "The law requires me to consider factors like remorse, restitution, and likelihood of reoffending. I've seen no evidence of remorse. You've maintained your innocence despite overwhelming evidence. You've shown no willingness to make amends." My father's jaw tightened. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. You will also be required to pay restitution in the amount of $180 million, the estimated value of what you stole from Jordan Walker, including the appreciation of those stolen assets over 22 years, plus interest." My mother let out a sob. The judge turned to her. "Mrs. Brooks, your role was less direct, but no less damaging. You enabled this fraud. You encouraged it. You helped hide it." My mother stood, shaking. "However, the prosecution has recommended leniency given your cooperation and lesser role. Therefore, you are sentenced to 4 years, suspended, with 5 years of house arrest and 1,000 hours of community service." The gavel came down. It was done. Security guards approached my father. He looked at me then, for the first time in months. His expression held something between hatred and disbelief. "You did this," he said. "You destroyed your own family." "No," I said quietly. "You did. 22 years ago. I just made sure there were consequences." They led him away in handcuffs. My mother followed, supported by her attorney, crying into a tissue. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. I pushed through to where Grandpa waited in his wheelchair, Liam standing beside him. "It's done," I said. "He got 18 years. Grandpa nodded slowly. His eyes were wet, but his expression was peaceful. "Justice," he said softly. "Not revenge. Justice." That night, back at the estate, we sat in his office. The same office where he'd shown me the folders 10 months ago. "How do you feel?" he asked. "I don't know. Empty, maybe. Or full. I can't tell the difference anymore. That's normal. Justice doesn't feel like victory. It feels like gravity, just the natural consequence of actions." I nodded, staring at my hands. "Do you think they'll ever understand? What they did wrong? Probably not. Some people never do." He sighed. "But that's not your responsibility. You did what was right. That's all you can control." The hotel empire, already declining from scandal and the legal costs of defense, had been sold off piece by piece over the months of trial. The properties sold for far less than their peak value. The taint of fraud had scared away premium buyers. Additional personal assets had been liquidated to cover the restitution balance. My parents' world had crumbled completely. "Now what?" I asked. "Now you start. Really start. You have an empire to run, a legacy to build. People who depend on you. I don't feel ready. No one ever does. But you'll learn. And you'll have help." He smiled. "You'll be better than I was. I'm sure of it." I wanted to argue, but I was too tired. That night, I dreamed of Christmas, of soup spilling, of my father's hand across my face, of snow falling outside tall windows. But when I woke, I was in my new home, in a room that belonged to me, in a life I'd earned by choosing integrity over comfort, and Grandpa was right. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like peace. Spring came quietly that year. The trial was over. My father was in federal prison. My mother was confined to house arrest in a small condo purchased with what little assets remained after restitution. The hotel empire that had been built on stolen foundations was gone. I didn't attend the final asset auctions. I didn't need to see it. Life moved forward. I spent those first months learning the furniture business, meeting with design teams, touring manufacturing facilities, understanding supply chains and distribution networks. The company Grandpa built, Jordan Designs, employed 800 people, 800 families, depending on decisions I made. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Grandpa taught me everything he could. His hands might not work well, but his mind was sharp. He reviewed every major decision, offered advice, shared hard-won wisdom. Business is simple, he told me one afternoon in the office. Make good products. Treat people fairly. Keep your word. Everything else is just details. That seems too simple. Simple doesn't mean easy. He smiled. But if you remember those 3 things, you'll never go wrong. One spring morning, about 5 months after the trial, I came into the office and found him in his favorite chair by the window. The sun was streaming in, catching the dust motes in golden light. A bowl of pumpkin soup sat on the table beside him, cooling. Spring soup. Not the tomato soup from Christmas. The seasons had changed. He looked peaceful, comfortable, like he'd simply drifted off to sleep while watching the gardens he'd designed. But when I touched his hand, it was still warm, and it didn't squeeze back. "Grandpa?" I whispered, though I already knew. He was gone. The funeral was unlike anything I'd expected. More than 1,000 people came. Workers from the original furniture factory who remembered Jordan Walker before the betrayal. Neighbors from his rented house days who'd never known he was wealthy. Employees from Jordan Designs who'd helped him rebuild. People I'd never met, whose lives he'd touched in ways I'd never known. They didn't call him Jordan Walker, billionaire. They didn't talk about his empire, or his wealth, or his revenge. They called him Mr. Jordan. They called him the boss who remembered our names. They called him the man who gave me a second chance. More than once, I heard someone say, "He was like a father to me." Standing by his casket, I understood what he'd meant about real wealth. It wasn't the $1.1 billion. It wasn't the estate or the company or the properties. It was this. These people. These lives he'd touched. This impact that would ripple forward long after he was gone. That was the legacy that mattered. Years passed. I ran Jordan Designs the way Grandpa taught me. Fairly, honestly, with integrity. The company grew. We opened new facilities, created new designs, employed more people. But I never forgot where it came from. Never forgot what it cost. Some nights, I still wondered if there'd been another way. If I could have pursued justice without destroying my parents so completely. But then I'd remember the way my father looked at Grandpa that Christmas night, with contempt, with annoyance, with the casual cruelty of someone who'd forgotten what it meant to be human. And I knew, some people only understand consequences. On the 5th anniversary of Grandpa's death, I made an announcement at the company's annual meeting. I'm establishing the Jordan Walker Scholarship Fund, I told the assembled staff and board members. For kids from broken homes who need a second chance. For people who want to learn a trade, start a business, build something with their own hands. The fund would provide full scholarships, mentorship, startup capital, everything someone needed to build a life, the way Grandpa had built his. My grandfather lost everything because of family, I said, and found everything again through people who chose him, through loyalty and integrity and hard work. This fund will help others do the same. Behind me, his portrait hung on the wall. An old man in a wheelchair, eyes bright, hands resting on worn wood. The same man who'd taught me to sand wood and make soup and stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. At the fund's opening ceremony, I told the full story publicly for the first time. The Christmas party, the soup, the slap, the exile, the months of struggle, the revelation, the choice, the trial, the legacy. Family isn't always blood, I said, looking out at the crowd of young people gathered for the first cohort of scholarships. Family is who stands by you when the world turns away. My grandfather lost everything because of family, and found everything again through those who chose him. I paused, gathering myself. I'm just trying to live the way he did, with integrity, with compassion, with the understanding that what you build matters less than how you build it and who you build it for. The audience applauded. Young faces, looking up at me with hope and determination. These were the people Grandpa had really been building for. Not me, not himself, them. Later that day, I returned to the office, Grandpa's office, though it was mine now. I sat in his chair, looking out at the gardens he'd designed, thinking about the journey from that Christmas night to this moment. They'd kicked us out of that mansion on Christmas. They'd thought they were throwing away dead weight. Turns out, they'd handed me the chance to become the man my grandfather always believed I could be, to build a legacy they never deserved to touch. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the thin folder, the one with the will I'd inherited. I'd never actually read it all the way through. At the bottom, below all the legal language about assets and accounts and properties, was a handwritten note. Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you chose justice over silence, then you already know everything I wanted to teach you. Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy peace. You chose peace. You chose integrity. You chose to stand up when it cost everything. That's why all of this is yours, not because you're my blood, but because you're my heart. Build something good. Help people who need it. Be the man I always knew you were. And remember, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming everything they could never be. I love you, Ethan. I always have. Grandpa. I folded the note carefully and placed it back in the drawer. Outside the window, the sun was setting. Golden light streamed across the gardens, illuminating the flowers Grandpa had planted years ago. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work. I'd make decisions, sign contracts, help the company grow. But tonight, I'd sit here in peace and remember the man who taught me that integrity costs something, and that's exactly why it's worth everything.